Yeah, so is it clear enough? Shay?
Yeah, it's clear. It's fine.
All right. Hi, good evening. Sorry, we are starting the class quite late this evening. Logistic issues. So, for this class, we'll be talking about positioning, Z-index, and basically what we have here, we talk about CSS units, media queries, flexbox, and aside talking about this, one of my main objectives for everyone will be that we should know how to find solutions to things we want to do online. So I'm making a lot of reference to W3 schools, right? So on the slide here, I just have points stated, and then we'll be going to W3 schools intermittently to check for further details. And then hopefully you get to know how to do further searches for whatever it is you want to get done, right? So, right, so moving on. So what is positioning, right? So basically the position property in CSS. So how CSS works, you have properties and you have values. So the position property is the property that specifies the positioning method of an element, right? So there are basically 5 types of position properties in CSS. You have the absolute, the relative, the static, the fixed, and the sticky, right? So I'll just go ahead to VS Code right now and let me try and zoom in. Hopefully this is clear enough, right? Right. So I would, if you're talking about the positioning, right, I'll just go ahead and have my body divs, right, and then I'll just have probably like 5 divs, and I'll give them all classes, right? So, sorry. So I'll just probably have one here. 2, 3, 4. This is just because I just want to give classes fast, right? And then I'm having all of them in one. sorry, the shortcuts are just using Emmet here. So, right. So I have a container, a div that is a container, and inside it I have 6 divs, right? And the aim of this is to show to demonstrate positioning, as I've said, right? So here, okay, I've linked my, here I can set, so each of the classes that I have here, right? So I have, all right. So my container, I can have container, and I'll just use the div selector to select. So this selector is just saying that every div that has container as a parent. So it's selecting all the divs inside the div with container as a class, right? I'm trying to look at the I'm trying to look at to see the comments so I can know when to draw back and when to stop. Right. So here I'm just going to set a height for all of them to 100 pixels, and I'll set a margin on the top to margin top and bottom to 10 pixels and left and right to 0. Right. I'll set okay. I'm setting my container class to have a width of 100% of the view width, right? So I would later on I would come and I will explain what the viewport is and what view width and view height is. But for here, I will set the width of the container to 100 view width, right? So that I can now set the width of the div that are child elements inside the container class to be 100%. That means I'm saying that I want the width of this to take the whole width of the parent container, and I'll explain that soon. So as 100%, right? So to distinguish it, I can just have a border here, 1 pixel solid red, right? And here I can have the border 1 pixel solid, right? And I can just have a padding here of 10 pixels. And I would like to have my global selector here and just do some resets here. So I'm setting border box. I'm setting box size, and sorry, to border box. Setting my padding to 0. Setting my margin. So this is just basic resets to remove all the styling that the browser would want to put in. Okay. So right, so I can go ahead and save that and just run this with live server. Right, okay, beautiful. So I set so I want to increase the size of this to let me just split this so I can switch windows. So I want to set the size of the border here to make it thicker so that we can see clearly. All right, so here is the container is set. This is it, right? So all the divs inside, recall that the selector I did here is saying that all divs that are child elements of this. So and inside here, this is container. So all the divs here, they are all direct child elements. Yeah, so it only affects divs that are direct child elements of container. So now what I need this to do is I need it to fill the whole page or even fill more than the whole page. So I'll increase the size of each of these. So let's call this, change it from 100 pixels to 200 pixels and see how that goes. All right. So now this is a div inside this, right? So I can set, I'll just like to apply some specific styling to each of the boxes. So dot one, right? I want to set the background to green. Sorry. So to set this to purple. So I'll set this to orange. I'm just selecting random colors so that we can see what I'm doing clearly. Pink, orange. What other color is there? Maroon. Yeah, and let's go. Okay. Right. So this is 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Right. So basically, what I'm doing is that I'm selecting each of these divs one by one. Right. So generally, I already set the size for all the divs. I already set that here when I said the height is 200 pixels. So if you come here now, I've already set the height of all of them. Right. So just to distinguish is why I said this before. So I'll just be commenting this out as I don't need it again, right? So now I have all these divs here, and I'll just basically let's record that we're talking about positioning here, right? So now by default, all of these elements in the page have a positioning, and the default position is set to static, right? So if you don't apply any position to it, it is set to static. Now, what I would want to do now is to say that how this works now is it's normally, ideally, your browser shows your elements in order of how they are written, right? So I have one here. The color of one is set to color of one, background color of one is set to green, right? So definitely the first box here is green. The second box is set to this color, third box. So you would not have it normally that I have the box that comes first. You will not have it that this div here, which is box 3 and has a background color of orange. You won't have it that it will come before one. No, it would show it in hierarchy of how you have put it in your code, right? So now I mentioned earlier that we're making reference to W3 schools. So if I just type W3 schools, right, and this is also, you could also pay attention so you see how to probably search for things that you need every now and then. So I could just search W3 schools and I put CSS positioning, right? So I can see CSS layout here, the position property, right? And I can also see this here, but I'll just go with this. I can see this is reference here. So this is what I'm looking for here. So this is, as I mentioned earlier that there are 5 ways to position elements. So we have static, we have relative, we have fixed, we have absolute, we have sticky, right? And I said that by default, right? All of them have positions set to sticky. All of them have positions set to static, right? So I would be applying a position property to the first box. That's to the div with class as 1. So the first position property I would want to talk about is the relative position property. So if I set position, so you do that by setting position, right? And automatically, if you're using VS Code, right, it brings out options for you. And you can see absolute, you can see fixed, you can see relative, you can see static, you can see sticky, right? Basically, these are specific to browsers, and then inherit is just saying that you should, if the parent element has a selector, that it should have, if the parent, what inherit is saying is that if the parent element, which is the container, has a position property, we should inherit that position property. but it's rare to do that. So I would set this to relative, right? So this is how the position property works. You first set where your position is. So I'm setting position to relative, right? So now let's go to WT schools and see how relative works. So position relative says that, let me just bring this in so you can see clearly. It says that an element with position relative is positioned relative to its normal position. Setting top, right, bottom, and left properties of the relatively positioned element will cause it to be adjusted away from its normal position. Other contents will not be adjusted to fit into any gap left by the element. All right, so let's go and see that in action. So I have set the position of 1 to relative. Right? So it still stays where it was earlier, right? But the minute I define top, so there, when we are defining position, you set what the position you want it to be, and then you define some parameters, most of which are left, right, top, and bottom. So basically what that is saying is that your viewports or any device you're looking at, either be on computer or on your phone, has 4 sides, right? Either a rectangle or a square, which is rare. So most likely a rectangle. So here, towards this place, I have my top. Towards this place, I have my bottom. Towards this place, I have my left. Towards this place, I have my right. Right. Now we set relative positioning. If you set any value for top, bottom, left, and right, it is going to move that container, that element relative to its original position, right? So if I say top, right, top 20 pixels, right, right. Now you can see that this has moved from where it originally was, right? It is no longer where it was before. So basically, let's go back to where that was. So this is how it is now, right? So now, when we are saying it is moving relative to its former position, the points, I mean, there are 4 corners here, so it begs the question that where is it now moving relative to? It is this top left corner here, that is the anchor point. Okay. So if this point is where it was before, sorry, pardon the background noise, I'm close to the road. So if this top here is where this was before, if you set whatever you set is relative mostly to this point, especially if you are setting top. If you are setting bottom, it is relative to this line under here, right? So now I've said top is 20 pixels. I'd like to increase that, right, to 50 pixels. And you see it has displaced it from where it was, right, by 50 pixels. So if you take that out back, relative. So when you set relative, I don't set top, bottom, left, or right. It keeps it in its original position, right? So sorry, if you have questions as I'm talking, you can leave them in the comment section. I'm looking at the comment section as I'm talking so that I'll be able to just address them as I'm going on, right? So we already said that setting position to relative would and setting top. So I've set top now. Now I want to set now also figure that it is counterintuitive to set top to a value and then now set bottom. It doesn't work like that. I've never tried it because it really doesn't make sense. But let's try it and see. I mean, you never go wrong with trying something. So if I set bottom to be under 50 pixels, right? Let's see what happens. Right. So really I don't know what's going on here because it's counterintuitive to set it together. So I've said set top. So okay, if there's top and bottom, it stayed where top was. So if I change top to if I change top to bottom, right? Now we can see that it has moved relative. So let's go back. It was here before, right? So if I set bottom to 50 pixels, I'm moving it, this is the bottom here, I'm moving it upwards by 50 pixels, right? Now, let me quickly say this, that I don't know if everybody did Cartesian coordinates, right? So if you move up, it's positive. If you want to move something up, that's positive. You want to move down, that's negative, right? So if I set bottom to 50 pixels, that means I'm saying move up from the bottom by 50 pixels, which is basically what happens here, right? Now, you can imagine if I say move by minus 50 pixels, right? It is moving it down. So from that place here, instead of moving up by 50 pixels, move it down by 50 pixels, which is almost, well, hi, I'm really, really sorry about that. I really can't say I know what happened, right? So let's just continue. I just finished talking about absolute positioning. So, right. So, okay. So I think the next position I want us to talk about is, let me just go back to the slides here. So, all right, leaving the slides. let's just go on to fixed positioning, right? So and as I said earlier, if you could always use W3 schools as a reference, right? So it talks, so basically, I mean, I've explained everything here, and then it goes into details talking about each of the different positions, right? So I said position static, right? So let's look at how that is together. Yeah. So elements are positioned static by default. Okay, yes. So you don't necessarily need to set it by default to static. So we understand how static is. We understand how relative is. So let's look at fixed positioning, right? So an element we position fixed is positioned relative to the viewport, right? So in a minute, I would explain what viewport is, which means it always stays in the same place, even if the page is scrolled. The top, right, bottom, and left properties are used to position the elements. Now, okay, so if I go back to what I have here, right? So let me set the width of box 2 to 50%. That means I'm just saying I want it to be half of the width of the container, which is the 100 view width, right? So, I mean, definitely earlier I had set the width of everything to 100%. But as with earlier classes, we already said that this is a cascading a cascading style sheet, right? So what is at the bottom? So whatever I have here will take precedence over what I have earlier. So if you look at this now, okay. So what is happening here now is specificity. So I could just have dot two dot two dot two to increase my specificity, right? So basically, if you want to, so specificity is how do I explain? All right. So specific now, if I have dot container here, it has a value. The specificity has a value, right? So this here, because of the way I structured it, has a higher specificity than just typing those two. So even though this is was written after this, because this has a higher specificity, it will take precedence over what I have here. So I just did what I did. So if you write dot two dot two, it's still the same selector, but it just increases the specificity. So that's why now it is applied. Earlier, when it was there alone, sorry, when it was there alone, it wasn't applied, right? So just setting that it is applied now. So I would want it to be 25% actually, right? So now we are talking about fixed positioning, right? So if I set, as I said, we set the position. So if I set position and I say fixed, right? Automatically, you would see what happens right now. You can see this. So when you set position fixed, now figure that when I did when I did position relative for box 1, let's still comment this out. When I did position relative for box 1, right? So what happened is that position relative. So now I've done position relative for box 1. This is box 1, the green one here, right? Now, if I move it from where it was, maybe by 500 pixels, right? See what's happening now. So box 1 originally is meant to be here, box 2 here, box 3 here. Ignore the green now. Box 3 here, box 3 will probably get to here. This box 4 here, box 5, box 6, right? Now that I've moved, now that I've set the position of this to relative, that's relative to where it was initially meant to be. So the movement is relative to this position that is meant to be. Now that I've set the position down to this space, right? You see that nothing else fills the space that it originally was in. It still remains blank like that. But you now figure that if I take this out, the positioning out, right? And I set position to fixed. The minute I set position to fixed, right? Another thing will take the position of where it was originally. So setting the position of an element to fixed takes it out of the flow of the page, right? So taking it out of the flow of the page, that means you can now say that in the normal flow of the page, green comes first, orange comes second, because figure that this 2 here is no longer in the flow of the page, right? So I can say that I want the position to be fixed, and that is what it is now. And now I can say left, from the left, I want it to be, say from the left, I want it to be 50, maybe, sorry, 200 pixels. That means the position from the left, I want it to be 200 pixels. Now, one of the things we read when we were on CMW3 schools, it said that it positions it relative to the viewport. Now, let me quickly go into what the viewport is. Now, you see the 4 corners I have here, from this corner to this corner to this corner to this corner. That is what your viewport is. The entire view, the entire screen estate that your device occupies, sorry, that your browser occupies, this tab here, this search panel, is not part of the viewport. The thing where the whole web page occupies, that's what you call viewport, right? Now, you figure that earlier I said something, I said VH here, VW, right? So I can just put in comments here. I say VW is view width and VH is view height, right? So if I say 100 view height, right? So if you just one view width is 1% of the view width. So one view width is 1% of this whole width. So if I say 100 view width, I'm saying that 100 view width. That's why you see that what this, so me saying 100 view width, what I mean is that I want it to take up the whole space here, right? I want to take up the whole space. That's 100% of the viewport's width, right? So now this here is making it relative to setting position to fixed, is making it relative to the viewport. That means that the whole window is the relative point. Recall that for relative view, it is relative to its original position. Now it is relative to the viewport, right? All right, great. So Sharon said this part is confusing. You could just type what part is confusing so that we'll address it, right? So I'll just continue when I type that. So now I've set the position here to left 200 pixels. I can set top to 500 pixels. So now from the left here, it is positioned 200 pixels. From the top, it's positioned 500 pixels. That means if you take a ruler and measure from here to here, it will be 500 pixels. If you take a ruler from here to here, it will be 200 pixels, right? Now, the funniest part of it is that you would see that the page scrolls, right? If you scroll your page, it stays, right? Now, let's quickly do something, and let me try and show you something to show a practical application of what this is, right? Now, so I could just do left and say left 0, 0, top 50%, right? Right, and I will just say the width of this one is, I'll set a fixed value, 100 pixels, and let's see how that is, right? Now, so you probably have been on a website such as, especially news websites or any kind of websites. Let me just add some scenario to it. Border bottom right radius, maybe 10 pixels. So border top right radius, 10 pixels. So I want this to be higher, 30. So you've probably been on a website whereby you are scrolling, and at one corner you just see one thing that refuses to move regardless of how you scroll. And then inside here you just see Twitter you see Facebook, you see Telegram, and you have fixed links, right? So maybe you just want to have social media linked here, right? And you want it to remain in this position, but people can still scroll through the page and everything. Usually, it's usually on this side, actually, right? So you can use something like this. So anything that you see that when you're scrolling on your page, it stays like that, right? It is most likely that it is fixed positioning that is used. Right? So it's because of fixed position, I can say that, okay, at any time, any day, no matter what I have on this page, this, take it out of the flow of the page and set it to this particular point and keep it there regardless of what happens on the page. Right? So that's how fixed positioning works. Now, if we go to the next positioning, so we already know what static is, we know what absolute is, we know what fixed is, right? So let's talk about sticky, right? Before we talk about sticky, let's talk about sticky last. Excuse me, let's talk about absolute. Now, absolute is positioned relative to the nearest positioned ancestor. This can be quite tricky to explain, right? So it says an element with position absolute is positioned relative to the nearest positioned ancestor. That means that the ancestor is positioned. So recall earlier we were saying parent, right? So let me just go to my code and explain something, right? Take this out of the page flow. So I have div here, right? So I set this to grandfather, right? Just follow my line of thinking here. So I can set this to father, right? I can set this to son. I can set this to child. I can set this to great grandchild, right? Now, so what's basically this explanation here is saying is that it is position relative to the nearest positioned ancestor. Now, follow me. That means that if you want to do anything on with absolute positioning, that means the ancestor, one of the ancestors, I'll say explain this to you, I'll explain these terms to you. Okay? That means one of the ancestors has to have a position value set. Right? So recall that by default, position of everything is set to static, even when you don't set it, right? But to set something to absolute, you need to set it. Otherwise, if you set a position, a value to absolute, right? And none of the ancestors has a position value, position property set. It would move that value, it will move that element relative to the viewport, to the root element, which is basically still the viewport, right? So that means I'm saying that if I want to set great grandchild somewhere in father or son or anything, if I want to set this to absolute, it's either this has a position property set, right? Now, see these elements here. This element highlighted is the direct parent of this element here. So when you say that the parent of this element, the parent of this element is this. This here is not this one that has son is not the parent of this here. So this is not the parent. So this here is parent, this is child. Now, all the elements that you have here, they are ancestors of this particular element here. So that means I can either have a position property set here, or a position property set here, or a position property set here, or one set here, right? That means if I have, now imagine that if I have position set here, set here, set here, set here, by the time I set this to absolute, it will move relative to the closest ancestor, right? And if it's only here I have it, it will move relative to this. Now let's explain that and see that in action. I'll just like to comment this out. Right, great. So, all right, so that's commented out, right? So let's go back to our page and see our page flow. And I'll just like to take out the comments for this what I have here. Just to be here. Now, you turn this back to how it was. So our page is back to how it was, right? Now, imagine in this box here. Now, let me even increase my boxes to let's increase the height to 300 pixels, right? Now let's inside my purple one, which is selector 2, right? Which is selector 2. What I want to do now is I want to create another element inside this particular element, right? So in div 2, let's just set let's set a class 2child. So that's just saying child of 2. Right? Now let's set dot 2child, right? So if I say dot 2child here, I'm selecting this here, and I just want to have width of 100 pixels. I'll make it a square, right? Height 100 pixels, and I'll just set a background to white. All right, so let's set the border on it so that it's clear. 3 pixels. Perfect. So let's go to our markup. So I have this box, box 1, box 2, box 3, box 4, box 5, and box 6, right? Inside box 2, I have a box called 2child. That's child of 2. Pardon my naming, right? So inside that box, you can see that this just stays here, right? Now, the funny thing is that let me set a margin, right? So I'll just like to set an all-round margin because I want to duplicate all that right now. Margin to 5 pixels, right? Now, yeah, right. Margin, and then I'll set this to have a padding of 5 pixels all around. So what I'm just doing is that the container here, this one here, I'm setting to have a padding, and then this one has a margin. Right? So if I have the outline red is not showing well on this, so I'll just have yellow here. No better. Green works perfectly. Yeah, green is fine. So let's change sugar. All right, so this is clear now. So if I duplicate this particular box inside this div here, I just do right. So now this, okay, everything is flowing to the next line because everything is flowing to the next line because it's a div, so they are block elements, right? So if I just decide to set them to inline block so that they flow to the side. Right. So basically I'm trying to explain everything so that nobody loses me, right? So like this is earlier before I set inline block, right? I'm sure you guys have discussed block level elements and inline block. So basically block elements, they take up the whole width such that if you have another block element, it spills to the next side. I'll just turn on one of my plugins right now, right? And then you can see that, well, basically because of the positioning here, that's why this is like this. But just setting this to inline block such that everything can flow to the side, right? So now I have this here, I have this here, I have this here, I have everything like this, right? So if I want to set absolute positioning, right? So hold on. Now I'll just take, so I'll remove all this that I have here. Apparently it wasn't really necessary. So I'll take everything I have here now. And then now if I set position, if I set the position to absolute, look at what's going to happen now. right? Now, set relative somewhere. So this is to child. I'm setting the position is to absolute. Now it is staying here because of, sorry, so right. Now this element here is being positioned relative to the container, right? So I have this here. I have to child here. Just trying to see where I have relative sets here. All right. So ideally, what I was expecting to happen, right, is okay. So because of the way I've laid out my markup, actually, right? Because of the way I've laid out my markup, that these are children of container here. That's why it is positioning relative to this here. If that were not the case, um, so my positioning is set to absolute here, and it is staying relative to what I have in this container here. Even though right now I can't, I don't know, right now it's not working as I expected, so I'll try and figure that out later, and I'll probably do a video and put it up once I find out why. But like for absolute positioning, this is staying relative to this container. So if I set to child position absolute, if I set stop, okay, I think I know what's going on now. If I set up to 100 pixels, exactly. So it's working as I expected it to work now. So basically, what happened was that I had not yet set a top, bottom, left, right parameter. So when you just set absolute, it's setting position to absolute doesn't do anything until you actually set your top, bottom, left, right values, right? So that's just what was going wrong, right? So setting top to, if I set top, that means I want it. Now, this box that I created here, these two charts here, that's what is here. Let me just set it to where is that background here? Background. Okay. So this box here, right? It is inside this box that it is in. But if I set the top value to 100 pixels, I want it to be top from this, right? But recall that I said that the parents or any of the ancestors should have a position property set. Now, look at this. So far, the parent of this is the element that is here now. Its parent, which is 2, does not have a position property set. Is the parent's parent, which is container, does not have a position property set. Right. So if no position property is set, it is now going to go relative to the viewport. But we don't want that. I want it to be here. So if I want it to be relative to this position here, what do? I go ahead and go to my box 2, which is the parent of that, and I say position, and I set it to relative. And now you see that the minute I set position to relative, it comes down here. Why? Because now that this one has a position property set, it will now work relative to this. So if you want something to be relative to another element, you have to set a position property on it. So if I don't set position to relative on this, you can best believe that it is not going to be relative to this. Did that save? No, it didn't save. So if I don't set position relative, you can best believe that it's not going to be relative to this one. So if I want it to be relative to this box here, right, that means that I would set it to relative. Now let's do one more thing, right? If I set my width to 50%, 50%, I set my height to 50. Sorry for that noise. This is how this is looking right now. Now, if I now go ahead and set a child inside these two child, pardon my naming convention, please, because I'm just going to go ahead and name two child, because for lack of better thing to do. So if I now go ahead and set, so now two child, I don't want two child to be absolute again. I just want it to be in the normal flow of the page. So normally it will be here, because I mean there's a padding here and then it has the margin itself. So if I now set dot two child here and I set the position to absolute, nothing is going to work yet, right? Okay, I've not set the height 50% with. So basically what it's just doing is, if this is 50% of what it is, this will now be 50% of what this one is here. So I'm just setting this here and I'm setting my background to white. Okay. Now, so I've set position to absolute this, right? But because I have relative here, that's why you're seeing that there. Now, so you can see how this one comes out here. Where is that? To child. All right, beautiful. So without setting any position property on anything yet, right? So I have my box two here. Inside I have two child here. Inside two child, I have two child, right? Now figure this, that the minute I set my position to absolute for two child, right, it takes it out of the flow of the page. You can see how that is. It takes it out of the flow. And because it is now relative to the viewport, that is why this height is malfunctioning. It's because I set it to 50%, 50%. But because none of the parent element is set to relative, right? It's now whatever it does, because this is a relative unit here. So I could just set this to a fixed value here to 50 pixels, 50 pixels, right? So this is it here. So it is. So I'm just trying to look through the comments, right? Now, so I have 50 pixels, 50 pixels, and that is like that. So now, if I want it to be, if I want to set a value, right, I set top 15 pixels, absolute. Because this one that is his parent does not have a position property set. The parent of this one, which is also an ancestor of it, does not have a position property set. Now, let's try and set a position property on two, position relative. So whatever happens now it is relative to this box two, right? It is not relative to this two chart, it is relative to box two because it's box two that has a position property set. If I take it out and I set position to relative, sorry, not in two chart. So the positioning now is set to this. So basically, the summary of everything is that you could set any of the parent elements. Just make sure that you set a position property if you want to use the absolute position. So basically, we've gone over what static is, which is the default. We've talked about relative, we've talked about fixed, we've talked about absolutes. Let's just talk about sticky and move on to the next thing. Right? So I'd just like to take out everything I have here to child, leave everything the way they are. Right. So right. So I'm back to having my containers the way they were. Now, last property, which is sticky. So you would see that there are some websites that you get to. I think I did one some time ago. Let me just try and see if it's active. All right. So you have, this is something I did some time ago, right? And then you have this top nav here, this top nav here. So when you start to scroll, you see that this stays up here, right? It stays at the top of the page when you start to scroll. And when you scroll back to where it was originally, it stays back where it was. But when you move there, it starts to scroll, right? So that's basically what sticky is. But let's see how it works, right? So the explanation for sticky here is an element with position sticky is positioned based on the user's scroll position. The sticky element toggles between relative and fixed, right? So I would set the value of what is that? So I think I want to set the value of this orange box to sticky. So now look at orange, my orange, let's remove all this that we have inside too, right? So the value of orange, the style that has orange in it is box 3, right? So I can set box 3 and I say position and I say sticky. Now what sticky does is sticky doesn't do anything. Most of the values don't do anything until you set a top, bottom, left, right value, right? So this is happening right now. So the minute I set stop to 0, that means I'm saying I want this box to be sticky at top 0. Now let's see how that works. It goes like this. I don't know if you can see how what happened just now. So ideally, what now happens when you set the position of something to sticky is that it remains in the normal flow, right? But based on scrolling, when this thing gets to where you've set it to, now figure that I set this to top 0. That means at the top of the page, 0. So if I set this to top 0, that means when it gets there, it stays there and the rest moves. So you've probably seen web pages whereby you are scrolling and one thing stays and then the rest is scrolling. It's sticky they use, right? So, right. So now imagine if I change the value of this to 20 pixels. That means around here it should be sticky. That's this 20 pixels from the top. Right? So say 20 pixels is not really large. So let's say 50 pixels. Right. So do that before it gets to the top. So at this point here, this is 80 pixels from top. So at that point, I want it to be sticky. So stay there and let the rest of the page keep moving. So you see that. So when you get to that point, you see that there's white space here where it was before. It keeps everything keeps on moving, right? And then bam, and then it continues. Right? So imagine if I take that out and maybe one of my pages, this one here, this last or this last box. Let's work with the left box to position sticky, and I set bottom to be 0. What you can take a wild guess of what's going to happen, right? So it will always be at the bottom. So when you scroll up, it continues to flow. But like when you're scrolling down at the bottom, it always remains at that position. Right? So basically, that's all about positioning. And here and W3 schools, you have CSS position here. You can go ahead and go through the whole document and then probably play around. You have test exercises, right? Now let's really talk about Z index. Right? Time is fast gone, but yeah, talking about Z index now. Let's go back to the slides that we have. For now, it's okay, but slides are not showing. Sorry a second. Um, all right. Back, right. So talking about Z index now. So basically, we've talked about positioning, now we're at Z index. So Z index property is the CSS property that specifies the stacked order of an element. An element with a higher stacked order value would always be in front of an element with a lower value. Any element that will have a Z index property must either have a position set or it must be a child of a flex container. Right? We might not be able to talk about Flexbox tonight, but let's see how far we can go. So, Z index, right? So earlier we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 boxes, and I'll just explain this briefly, right? And then I'll give resources that we do use to do further in same W3 school. So all these elements here, I'm going to set them to, I'll set container to relative. I'll set all these elements to absolute, right? And that means everything will stack on each other. So I'm setting container to position relative and position of all this, right? I mean, setting positions to absolute takes it out of the web flow, so it just remains there. So now that I've set that to absolute, you can see everything is here. Every single thing is here. So except this one that I set to. Okay. Okay. So you can imagine that because of the way I positioned it, ignore the position. But like all the 6 boxes currently are stacked on each other. Right? They're all stacked on each other. And the way it is now, gray is showing because it is the last out of all the boxes. So recall that I said that. So imagine you have paper. So put one paper. You write on one page, write on the second page, write on the third page, write on the fourth page. Now, if you're reading through the book, there's a hierarchy in which you have to read. You can't start from page 4 to continue in page 1 and then go to page 3 and then go back to page 2. You have to do page 1, page 2, page 3, page 4, right? So the same way it is here. So I've set 1, 2, 3. So that's the normal flow. Right? That means at the bottom, this is there. On top of this, on top of 1, you have 2. On top of this, you have 3. On top, you have 4, then 5, then 6, right? Now, that because 6 is the last, because that's the one that has light state color. That's what is on top. Now we said, now let's quickly go and just do W3 schools Z index. All right. So this is the article talking about Z index here. So yeah, stack order basically. And here you can see this here. So basically W3 schools goes in depth. So it tells that the default value of sticky of Z index is auto, right? So what auto does is it just looks at the order in which it is written, your markup is written, and then sets hierarchy based on that. Now, that means, but by value, if you're talking about the actual value, all of them have their Z index set to 0, right? Now, with that in mind, if I come here and I say, because you see the condition that was given for Z index, I said only works on positioned elements. That means they have to be positioned, and already earlier, we already set position of all of them to be absolute, right? So now I can just go ahead and here, I can say, I said Z index of all of them is 0, but they are just tagged on each other because of how they appear. I can now set the Z index of this one to be 1. The minute I set Z index of this one to be 1, look at what happens. The green that comes up. That's 1 here. Because we said that all of them have Z index of 0 now, but this is arranged in hierarchy because of how the markup is written. So if Z index of everything is 0, the minute I set Z index of 1, that means I'm saying that this one is on top of everything because 1 is greater than 0. So that's green. Now, the minute I come and say orange here, the Z index is what? 5. You can guess what's going to happen. Orange is coming up, right? So Z index is just that value that you just use to set what you want to show on top, right? So with Z index, you can always set values on top of each other, right? So right, I think that's just all I'll say about Z index. You can always go back here for an in-depth explanation. It's very concise and very, very explanatory. Right. So moving on from there, let's talk about responsive web design. Basically, responsive web design is the art of making a website look good on all devices and across different screen sizes. So what does that mean? One of my favorite websites, anytime, any day, is apple.com. Pardon me, I like good things. So look at how beautiful this website is, right? And going through from top to bottom of this website. Now, you probably would have noticed, if you haven't till now, right? When you look at this same web page on your phone, it's different. So let's try and look at it on our phone and see how it looks. So you can see once it's a bit smaller, you can see that the images that were on one line and text, everything is now broken up. You can see this had something beside it. You can see that the layout is now different. You can see that this is different. You can see how this is also different, right? And you can just see how everything was stacked on each other, right? Now, all this is what we call responsive design, making it look good. Imagine trying to cramp all this up and maintain the way it looks exactly like this on your phone screen without adjusting anything. People will barely be able to use the websites, or they will not even be able to use it at all, right? So based on that, a number of things to consider for responsive web design. Right? And then basically you have units. You have CSS units. So you have CSS units, you have media queries. I think these are the two I'll be talking about tonight. So CSS units, CSS has a lot of units actually for expressing length. And then it could either be absolute or they could be relative. So if it's absolute, that means you are setting a fixed value for it. I mean, if I say, so earlier I was having issues when I set something to 50% and then what it was relative to was changing, right? So if I say this is the box, and the box is 50 pixels, no matter where it is going to be 50 pixels. That is an absolute value, right? But relative values, you're making reference to something Okay, based on this, make this length this. Based on this, make this length this. Right. Now, let's see some absolute length, centimeter, millimeter. Yeah, I don't really has a question. Please go ahead and ask your question. I'll answer. Right. So you have centimeter, millimeter, pixels, inches, right? And then for relative length, you have rem, you have m, you have vh, you have vw, you have cw, you have vmin, right? I'll be talking about all of them. The most used absolute length is pixels, and then the most used relative length, you have the rem, you have the m, you have the vh, you have the vw. Right. Beautiful question. You said what are the differences? What's the difference between relative and absolute values? Right. So now we are going into CSS units. So let's talk about what CSS units are. Now, let's clean this markup. Let's clean what we have here and just take it out and just try and start working with something else. Okay. So I still have my container there. Right. So in my container, I just want to have maybe I just have these words here. Okay. I just said okay. So by default, fonts are set to 16 pixels, right? So sorry. Okay. So I'll just have a padding. Now we'll be using these fonts to explain what these fonts are. Now in this place, let me just rather put a P paragraph instead of just putting text directly. All right. So so if I now have my text and I just do dots my text, right, and I have font size 20 pixels. Right. So basically, for the person that asked what's the difference between relative and absolute values, right? So this me setting the font size of all this text, right, to 20 pixels. That means I'm saying that no matter where this thing appears, I want it to be 20 pixels. Look at this. If I change this to a font screen, you can see that my font is still 20 pixels here. So wherever the font is, 20 pixels is 20 pixels, right? So it should be on, even if it's on an iWatch, just with a small screen, this is how my font is going to show, because 20 pixels is going to be 20 pixels, right? You can either use centimeter or anything, but like for standard web practices, you use pixels to define your absolute length or absolute units, right? Now, if you want to talk about relative units, right, that means now relative units, you're making reference to something, right? So you're setting your size based on the value of something, right? So let's talk about what rem is. So rem is saying that, okay, I want this length to be defined relative to the root element, right? Now, every HTML document has a root element, and that's the HTML selector. Now, if you go to the code here and you see this here, right? You see you see these tags here, this HTML tag, that's the root element of the page, right? So if I set this to 1 rem, so the roots Oh, see, VS Code even does this thing. It says indicates the desired font set for scalable fonts. The font size is the scale factor applied to the M unit of the font. And yes, there's a lot of nonsense. Moving on. So if I say I want one rem, that means I'm saying that I want this to be relative to the font size of the root element. Now, notice that at all times, your root element is your HTML. And by default, the default font size of your root element, which is the HTML, is 16 pixels. So now if I go ahead and I do the selector and I say HTML, right? And I say font size 16 pixels, it's basically me saying already what exists before. You see that the font does not change. So by default, this is what exists, right? So me setting this to 16 pixels, no any magic, is what was there before, it's the default value. But if I go ahead and set this to 26 pixels, no, hold on. Before we do anything, let's inspect. Let's inspect and see this thing ourselves. So if we inspect and you see this, you can see that font size, font is saying 16 pixels. You can see clearly that it says font is 16 pixels, right? So let's move on. If I say font size is 26 pixels, I now say that the font size of this is 1 rem. That means I'm saying that it is 1 times the font size of the root element. That means I'm saying that it is 26 pixels, right? If you come here, you can clearly see that the font has increased. If we inspect, you can see this. What font size is what? You can see down there, it says 26 pixels. So based on this font size, I mean, if I remove it, it goes back to its default, which is 16 pixels. See? Now, if I can set this to 10 pixels, and then it goes smaller, and then you go to the font size and it says 10 pixels. Or you say 50 pixels, right? See? So, but you see that the font size has not changed. It still remains 1 rem, right? So it is just relative to the root elements. Rem, you see rem, you are saying the font size relative to the root element, right? So that means I can say 0.5 rem. So if the font size is not defined, right, and I just say 0.5 rem, by default, the font size of the root element is 16 pixels, right? So that means I'm saying that it is 8 pixels, right? So that is one of the relative units, right? So relative just makes reference to the font size of the root element, which is your HTML. Now you could have something called M instead of rem. So 1M. Now, M is also a relative unit, but it is different from rem. Rem always makes reference to the root element in your document object model, which is HTML. This one makes reference to the parent of this element. Now, my text is here, right? My text, if I set my text to 1M, right? By default, we always know that any font size that is not set will be 16 pixels, as long as it's not a heading, right? So container here is the parent of my text, right? Now, if I set HTML, if I set the font size of HTML to 50 pixels, and this is 1M, you see that it doesn't do anything. Or does it? Okay, it does, because it is the one that is set. It is the ancestor that is set. There's no font size set on this, right? So as long as there's no font size, well, coming here, if I set font size to 10 pixels, you can see that. So because I did not set, so M doesn't necessarily work with parents alone, it works with ancestors, right? Which is something I'm confirming right now. So we all learn. So M works with ancestors. So the fact that I didn't set font size here and I set it here, right? It's working on, this is what this is making reference to. But if I set font size here to 10 pixels, right? If I set font size to 10 pixels, this, so I'm trying to look at this. Okay, let me. So if I set this to 10 pixels or say 20 pixels, right? I'm saying that the font size here should be relative to the parent here, right? So you can see that this is 20 pixels here. If I set this to 30 pixels, it goes to 30 pixels, right? So M is usually making reference to a parent selector. If I change this to rem, even though the parent selector is 30 pixels, it's to make reference to the root element. Watch. Can you see that? So at rem always makes reference to the HTML font size, right? So that is that. Now you have VH, you have V width. Earlier, you see that when we're talking about positioning, I set my containers width to view width, 100 view width. I can set my font size. Now, also take note that any units that are setting rem and everything is not only restricted to font size. You can also font size. You can also set the maybe width height in rem in m. It depends on you, right? So if I say font size, excuse me, is 1 VH. What I'm saying is that it is 1% of my view height, right? So if I set it to 2 VH, it is 2% of my view height. If I set it to 100 VH, you can imagine how large that would be. Yeah, definitely. You can see that. So you can see that it's 100 VH actually. So you get when you consider line spacing too, it's taking up the whole width of the page. So the whole height of the page. So for font size, you rarely use. So for font size, the relative units you use mostly will either be M or rem, but it's more advisable to use rem because of consistency. Because you can have different parent selectors to different font sizes. But with rem, you always know that, okay, this is a single source of truth. And here I can always change it, and every other value that's related to this will change, right? So that's what I think that's as much as I'll go. And then you can always come to talk about CSS units. Let's come here. Oh, beautiful here. So CSS units here. W3 schools, assignments, come over here, read through. Okay, you can see here, relative to the font size of the elements, you have this thing here, right? So the mostly used, you have rem, you have m, you have vh, you have vw, you have percentage, right? So you can come here and read more about that. Now, moving on, we have media queries. So media queries, they are CSS queries that checks for some parameter and such render a web page based on it, right? Now, recall the Apple website that I opened earlier, right? It was saying something like, you were seeing different things. So, okay. Now, so see this, let's take this out and let's quickly talk about that. So my container, I can set my max width to 900 pixels. Right, and I can set the background to light blue. Yeah, I can set the height to take up. So if I say height is equals to 100 view width, that means I want to take up the whole width of the page, the whole width of. So if I wanted to take the whole height, that's 100 VH. So VH is view height, VW is view width. So I'm saying I want to take up 100% of this whole length. So you can see I can scroll because that is the whole screen here. And you see that if I change it to a mobile view, right, you see that it doesn't scroll, it's just taking up. So whatever the view height is, that's the length, that's the width height that it occupies, right? So okay, beautiful. So let me just have 10 pixels here. Okay, now to scroll because I have margin. Now, but basically what I'm trying to do is that we're talking about media queries now. And I said it's defined by the keyword. Now please pay attention. Right? So I could have at media, right? So if this is the keyword for using at media, and then I can now have, there are different things to use to specify that you can use in your at media to set media queries, right? But the most used in so far that I have been in this industry, right, is max width. So you can set max width for 80 pixels, right? So what happens is that I'm saying that at media, watch out for max width for 80 pixels, right? So that means I'm saying that anything happening such that the width is 480 pixels or less, right? That means the boundary for this is 480 pixels, right? That means I'm saying that at 480 pixels and below, set the background of dot container purple. Now, so if you go here now, you can see that, right? So basically, let me remove this margin. So basically, just look at the top corner here. You can see the value of the page here. So as I've done it now. So if I'm reducing it, you can see that my screen size is reducing, right? And it's expected that once I hit 480, my background will change. Why? Because based on the screen size, I've set it to snap. So very soon at that point, beautiful. So you see that as 480, it changes background, right? So you can now, so basically what I've done here is not magic, right? So I can say that as media, max width is 480 pixels, right? And inside this block, anything I've defined earlier, if I want it to look different, right? So I can say that I want my background to be purple. I want my height to be announced there. I want height to be 50 VH, right? And then at that point, you just see that your styling is applied for that screen size. See, so at that screen size, the height reduces. So basically, media queries are what you use to make your website responsive. Right? So at 480 pixels, I'm saying that I want this and everything. I can now even set another one, right? So there's no limit. I can set at main width. You can also set main width to 900 pixels. Right? That means you are saying that anything 900 pixels and above, what I have in this block should apply, right? So, but for this, let me still continue my max width. That means I'm saying that at 320 pixels and below, right? I want my background color to be orange. What's happening? Oh, okay, I didn't put it selected here. So if you watch closely, what's going to happen now? You see that I already set that at, so here, so at 480 and less, change to this. At 320 or less, change to this. So you can see that at this place too, I can set my height to be back to 100 VH, right? So you see that here, and then you see how it changes, and then how it starts. So basically, and you can see that it's the same elements that is changing colors and height like that. So with media query, with this media queries, there's limitless possibilities to how you can style your page. And I'll just open the reference for that. CSS W3 schools. Let's go to media queries. Okay. So just go to so media queries here. So it said media queries can be used to check many things: width and height of the viewport, width and height of device, orientation. There's a whole lot of things. So basically, I'm just introducing you to it, right? And here you can see what you have here. So here you have your CSS code, the way you normally write it inside it. And then you just have a lot of documentation here. By default, everything is all. You could define if you want print, screen, speech, and all that. So these are the reading tasks that you have to come to. Okay, so I think at this point I'll just take questions, so you can drop your questions. So I'm looking through now. So I didn't really saying, how do we know the exact viewport height to use? Well, it depends on you. You have to be really careful when you're using responsive units though, because you also make sure that if you're looking at the design, you want to make it look as it looks in the design, right? So with responsive units, you're just trying to make sure that it's, if you change screen size, it still looks good, right? So with viewport height, it's at your discretion to use whatever unit you want to use. There might be scenarios whereby viewport height is not the best value to use, and there might be scenarios whereby it is the best to use. So it depends on your use case. So I won't exactly say that there's a particular height to use. It depends on you, right? So any other questions? Let's take questions. I'm done. I'm done for the night. I would continue with. I meant to take Flexbox, but like time is fast spent, so I'll just say we should take that. I think I'll just wait for the next 2 minutes to see if we have questions before I end the meeting. What are the various screen sizes? Well, so let's check that out together. So generally, different devices actually have different screen sizes, right? Different devices. So what you normally tend to do is that you set a range. So see what I did here, for example. I'm saying that any screen that, so what I'm saying is that any screen that, I would answer the question that just gave me now, a second, right? Any screen that is 480 pixels and below, apply this to it, right? So if the screen is 420 or 470, as long as it's below 480, this style should apply for it, because there's 1,001 different screen sizes, because there are different devices and there are different device makers. Right? But what you just need to do is set an interval based on how small this screen is or based on how large this screen is. This style should apply, right? If not, so maybe at another length, apply these particular styles to these screen sizes. So you are working with a range, not a particular screen size, because it will be impossible to write code for every single screen size, right? So Olufemi says that, please, does 100 view height represent the total height of a single page? Now, so what a, like Zuri's landing page. So look at Zuri.team now. If you go to Zuri.team, right now, 100 view height is not the length of this whole page. 100 view height is from this top here to this bottom here. Sorry, I'm not sharing now. Right. 100 view height here is from this height here to this bottom here. It is not the length of this whole page. It's just from here to here. So there are times that you just want to show a page and you don't want it to be more than this whole page. You don't want people to scroll. So you just set a fixed with 100 view height. So that this just from top here to bottom here is 100 view height. Right. So yes, that brings us to the end of the class. Any other question? 2 minutes and we're done. All right, we're done. Thank you.